Welcome to Bat Therapy, exploring your favorite comic book characters through the lens of clinical psychology. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding, and it's not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. All right, so today we are going to be talking about two films. One is the Academy Award-winning Suicide Squad, and the other is James Gunn's The Suicide Squad.
Yay!
For those of you that don't know, the first Suicide Squad, which was not met with the happiest of reviews, it won an Academy Award for Best Makeup.
I forgot about that.
Also, the timing was really great as well. So Trump's cabinet and his campaign, the staff changed up so much that they got the nickname the Suicide Squad.
Ugh. That's not what you want. That's not what you want. We're going to be talking about that today. Why that is not what you want. I mean, aside from the obvious, anything called the Suicide Squad, not so great. I mean, even in I forget which movie, but they were like, we don't call ourselves that. This is...
Yes.
What is it? Task Force X?
Task Force X, right.
Yeah.
It's Task Force X. And the thing that's funny, so today's source material is definitely just the two Suicide Squad movies that are in the DC extended, the cinematic DC extended universe. But if you were to look up like the comic book Suicide Squad, the number of characters that have been in this group is insane. Like if you list it out, it definitely looks like a CVS receipt because the list just goes on and on and on to the point that some writers would actually make up characters
just so they could kill them off.
Yes.
Oh, it's like Star Trek where you don't want to be the red shirt.
Exactly. Suicide Squad is it's very much a comic book and movies that are filled with red shirts because a lot of people die. A lot of people die. More in the second movie than the first.
Oh
but...
man, the second movie, just a heads up for anyone who hasn't watched in a while, because I watched them pretty much in a row. And the second one's definitely gorier than the first. I was like, whoa, okay. I mean, it's not like it's not like Homelander and The Boys and that level of gore, but it's kind of, it was like the first step toward that kind of gore.
Which, yeah, gosh, we haven't really talked about The Boys yet, but they're getting impressive with just how gory they can be.
It's hard for me to watch.
Oh yeah, it's rough. It's rough. And this movie had some pretty gory moments as well as far as roughness. The first one not so much because it had that PG-13 rating for it, but the second one I feel like James Gunn went all out and he's like, I'm gonna do everything in this movie that Disney wouldn't let me do in Guardians of the Galaxy. And so he bring me that bag of blood. Like, he just went all in. And I remember so for those of you that are listening and have never watched these movies, I'm just going to say it, spoiler alert. Pretty massive spoiler alert. And for those of you that have no idea what we're talking about, so the Suicide Squad are a super hero team, if you will, made up of villains. Amanda Waller put together this group of villains. In the comic books, they were started off, she basically kidnapped them from other prisons and then brought them together, and it was like 40 of them in the beginning, and then she basically hosted tryouts, and in process of elimination, 7 survived.
Oh god, sounds about right. Amanda Waller is something else.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have to come back around and do an entire podcast episode all about Amanda Waller, because I don't know, like, you talk about people being cold as ice, but she's absolute zero. Like, it's oh my god, like, she has no problem just getting down there in the mud and just being the lowest of the low. Like, she would like in Dante's Inferno, Dante would be in her Suicide Squad. Like, that's how low she goes. It's made up of like just the worst of the worst, and she has no idea sinking to the lowest level. And so she forms Task Force X, and Task Force X is, just like I said, it's made up of various villains, and in the comic books they come from all over. So you'll see characters in the Suicide Squad that are villains of every single DC superhero at some point. Like they just show up out of nowhere, and it's in constant rotation because people are getting killed. And they're being killed not because they're on super dangerous missions, but also because in order to be in the Suicide Squad, you have to get a bomb implanted into your head.
As you do.
So you were mentioning coercion. I do believe a bomb in the head is one way to coerce people.
So yeah, so here's this thing that we have with Suicide Squad is, so Keaton and I, when we were talking about, hey, what topics are we gonna do, and Keaton came up with the really great idea of Suicide Squad, and like, what is everything going on behind the scenes when you're forced to do something? And so here's the annoying thing about me as a psychologist is I get very technical about how things are worded. You can ask my clients if you knew who they were, which of course you don't, but I get very technical about how we use words. And so when it comes to this, technically, people in the Suicide Squad have choices that they can make. However, they are heavily coerced. And like lots of physical coercion to essentially force your hand to be more likely to pick certain options that are going to be in Amanda Waller's favor. And so Amanda Waller, she's working for the government. She's essentially like, we're going to do whatever it takes to keep the government afloat, which, yeah, she does a bunch of sketchy stuff. I mean, I think it depends. And Keaton, you know things beyond the movies better than I do. But, in some cases, she doesn't ask, and all of a sudden you have a bomb implanted in your head and you're going to work for us.
Right.
But I think there are other times where there's a little bit of like extra coercion where it's like, hey, we're having a conversation about how you should do this for me. Oh, and by the way, for some reason, she's always threatening people's kids, which seems, I don't know. All right.
Yeah. Especially in the movies. Like comic
Yeah.
book Amanda Waller, you're absolutely right. They'll just wake up with a bomb in their head and she's like, do what I say. And then there's always someone in the group that doesn't believe her. Like, whatever, you're bluffing, and then their head explodes.
But once again, that's proof that technically people have a choice. They right? Like,
I guess.
I mean, technically, is it a wonderful choice? Absolutely not. But you have the option to choose to do what she says or have your brain explode.
Yes, those are the options on the table. Normally it's between the strawberry or the blueberry Pop Tarts, but today it's head or no head. Right?
Exactly. So yeah, technically there are options. They're just really, really awful ones because yeah, they're nicknamed the Suicide Squad because she's never asking you to do something that she would say send highly trained United States military to do. No, these are the things that they don't want to lose those assets to. So people don't really care if you come back. And I don't know how much it ranges, but at least in the movies, it was like 10 years off your sentence. And one guy was like, okay, I've got like 200 and some years left.
Yeah. And in the movies, if you complete the mission, it's 10 years off of your sentence. And a lot of the times the villains won't even bother because they're like, I have 500 years.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this. This is absolutely ridiculous. But going back to your coercion thing, that's when Amanda Waller does her best work. Like in the second movie, particularly with the character Bloodsport. Bloodsport's like, I'm not joining your Suicide Squad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, screw you. I'm not doing anything. And in the movies, they do have a choice. She doesn't just put the bomb in their head without their permission. They have to agree to it, I guess.
I think it depended.
It did. That's true because Michael Rooker's character, I don't think he wanted to go at all, but he still ended up going. But with Deadshot, not Deadshot, Bloodsport, I'm sorry, I get them mixed up. They're such similar characters. Well, with Bloodsport, he's like, I'm not going. And Amanda Waller's just like, that's too bad. Your daughter shoplifted, and she's underage, but you know what? I'm going to send her to maximum security prison. And
Mm-hmm.
guess what? In this maximum security prison, they die. And she just drops it. And like I said, she's cold as ice because she will say that to them with a
Mm-hmm.
smile on her face.
Yeah. So it's interesting, though. Essentially, what is going on with all this coercion is cognitive dissonance. So with our
Okay.
so with our topic today, I delved back into stuff I haven't looked at in years, but used to love learning about, which is social psychology. So essentially, how do people tend to respond in different scenarios? Just, people in general. So essentially, you have these situations where, for most, if not all of these characters, due to the coercion, they have cognitive dissonance, meaning that their beliefs and their actions are in dissonance, are in conflict with one another. So I'm doing something that is not consistent with what I want, what I believe, what I value. And it's really interesting because I just kept thinking about all the different nuances of this. Because if you think about it, she doesn't have to give them time off their sentence.
True.
I have a theory. I have a theory about that.
Okay.
So there's this experiment that they did where they had people do a really, really boring task. I forget what the task is, but it's super boring. And then they paid the person either $1 or $20. And then they told them to lie to the next person coming in and tell them that it was an interesting task. And so don't you love these experiments are so fun. So what they found was when they asked people to rate how interesting they found the task later on, the people that the people that were paid $1 actually rated the task as more interesting as the people who had been paid $20. And so the theory behind that was essentially that they lied and they needed an explanation for why they were lying. And $1 is just $1 versus 20, where it's like, okay, well, I lied to them because I got $20
Right.
versus, I mean, it was only $1. So then the person, like, that conflict inside, like, was the dollar really enough to be dishonest, ends up shifting people into actually changing how they viewed what they were doing. And so I kind of wonder if this is Amanda Waller being like super devious and like giving this little tiny bit of something that they would want, but not a lot of it, not enough to say, oh, she's bribing me. So I'm coercing you, but I'm also giving you a little bit of something. So maybe it'll like kind of change their opinions of it over time.
Like that's funny because in my head I'm just imagining like people that said no to the Suicide Squad offer walking around and there's just a random guy in the cafeteria just like, man, you know what's a long time? 10 years. Man, I've been working here for 10 years. That is an entire lifetime. I tell you, what I wouldn't do to get 10 years of my life back, like constantly feeding them that just so they're like, man, I guess 10 years off my 500-year sentence would be pretty good because after that, I only have to do like 50 more and I can be out
Mm-hmm.
of here.
So that's the thing is it's not nothing, but it's also not a lot. So yeah, it's like it's something, but it's not something. So it like, yeah, it can create this like interesting kind of internal struggle that can actually potentially lead people to seeing things differently over time. So I can't help but wonder if that's why there's this like puny little offer that's attached. Because all she has to do is be like, there's a bomb in your head, do it or your head explodes.
This honestly, it kind of reminds me of like Rotten Tomato movie reviews. Like people will look at a Rotten Tomato movie review and they're like, you know what, that's a good movie, right? And it's they might not have even seen it, right? But they're like, oh, I'm not gonna see that. It got bad reviews on
Mm-hmm.
Rotten Tomatoes, so but it's like, oh no, this one's certified fresh. You should do this mission for Amanda Waller, right?
I mean, there's so many different things that can change our perception of what's going on. And just in general, so the reason that cognitive dissonance is such a big thing is that it's really uncomfortable to do things or experience things that are inconsistent with what we think and what we believe and what we naturally are drawn toward. It's why most of us are skewed and tend to only listen to the type of news that shares from our own political views, for example. And why things, honestly, like algorithms for Facebook and whatnot, are so dangerous, because it just feeds into that more and more and more and more. Because yeah, I mean, we don't like that feeling that comes from that conflict, so we try and
And
find ways around it.
and part of it too, I wonder if she's also like gassing up the villains themselves, because I remember at the beginning of the first movie she says, "I finally found them, the worst of the worst," and I wonder if any of those villains heard that and felt good about themselves, because never, ever, ever, ever in the history of anything has someone said, "You know who's a really bad villain that you don't want to mess with? Captain Boomerang," right? Like no one's ever said that, but deep down he's like, "Yeah, I'm in Task Force X. I'm the worst of the worst." It's like,
That's a fair
no, you're
point.
not. You're really not, right? But being in the Suicide Squad definitely puts you among elite villains, I suppose. Except they can't be that great of villains because they got caught, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, that is a good point. Well, and I mean, it just goes to show that there's almost nothing in life, even when you go to these really terrible extremes. And this isn't to take away from suffering or horrible things whatsoever, but most of the time there's always going to be some sort of pro and some sort of con, some sort of cost, some sort of benefit. So yeah, I mean, even for this like really really terrible situation, for some of them it might be like a hey look, look how badass I am. Amanda Waller picked me.
I also feel like there's not a lot that goes into who gets on the team. Like she does.
Like, why was the
Amanda
weasel
Waller.
there?
What? we're gonna we're we're gonna do a 5-part segment of this podcast all about Weasel and his
So for those of
five
you
minutes of fame.
that
Oh my god.
that was the second movie, right? Okay.
Yes.
So in the second movie, for those who don't remember, who haven't seen it, there's literally just this like human-sized weasel person, but more weasel than person, I think. And yeah, it like you never find out why the weasel's there. Actually, the weasel is like a hysterical little tiny little subplot that
Right.
I just love. But yeah, it's like you've got this like weasel guy there, and yeah, they don't seem to have rhyme or reason to everyone that's there. Like
They
you don't
don't.
see why that person.
Right, because every single time they always have a couple people on the Suicide Squad that are loose cannons that completely don't care whether they live or die.
Hmm.
Harley Quinn, for example, if I had to pick someone to save the world, I wouldn't pick her on general principle. It's like she got her ideals from the Joker, right? And it's she just doesn't care about anything at all. And
I don't
it's so
agree with
funny.
that.
I don't know. Like it's yeah. That's and honestly, it's one of the issues I have with the Suicide Squad, because they just suddenly made them this they always try to make them into this big happy family. I'm like, that's not the Suicide Squad. Like I remember in the first movie, at one point Harley Quinn is getting away, and Amanda Waller says, "Hey, if you shoot her right now,
Oh, right, yeah.
you go free." Deadshot would have shot her 5 times over. He wouldn't have even considered it, right? He's like, "Nope, I didn't shoot her because I know you're lying." No, he would have shot her, and he'd have been like, "I knew you were lying." That's what would have actually happened. But in this, like, nope, we stick together. Like, and it is funny because the movies, I won't say the especially the first one, they certainly didn't do their best, but it, they did do a good job of picking these super random people
Mm-hmm.
out of a hat. And even when she's introducing them, it's like that might come in handy once. Like, hey, here's this guy. He can climb anything. It's like, okay. So, but we're fighting a crazy Aztec god. So might not need a rock climber. I'm just gonna throw that out there. They have stairs in most of these buildings that we're gonna be going through, right? And they're like Captain Boomerang, like, okay, he has boomerangs, and for some reason he always has beer, and no one knows where he's getting it from. And it's quirky and it is fun.
Yeah.
I'll say
So
it is fun.
so here's one thing I will say about them becoming a family. And I'm not saying that I'm totally excusing everything. But they do see that when you pull people together and they have a common goal, that it can actually pull people together that have been on very opposing sides. So if it's something that has to be done, especially something, the basics and necessities, i.e., surviving, that can really bond people together as a team in a way other things don't. And once again, I'm not saying that that's what would happen in this case, especially, I mean, there's so many nuances to these characters, and they've been in so many, probably so many life and death kinds of situations like this before. I don't know if it would be the same for them, especially because they don't have training together to bond them. But I could see at least a little bit of that. But yeah, I will agree
That
with you
does,
that it does seem like a long shot because of what he would lose if
yeah.
he didn't just shoot her.
And I will say you're absolutely right on that. Like when people have a common goal, suddenly, yeah, they do become closer just to kind of accomplish whatever this mission is. And the mission that Amanda Waller always sends them on is this nigh impossible task. And so she just brings together a random group of supervillains and say, "Hey, do this." And my favorite part about it is in the movie she puts this task force together after Superman dies. It's like, oh man, Superman's dead. What are we gonna do? We're gonna get all of the bad villains and put them together and put a bomb in their head and make them do whatever we say. Like it, I would have loved to have been there in the pitch meeting for that. Like, hey, Amanda, so what do you need budgeting for this next coming up year? Well, we all know Superman died. God rest his wonderful Kansas born soul. But because he's dead, we need an alternative plan. Oh, so maybe try and make some of our soldiers into super soldiers? No, 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 no. Nothing like that. How about we take supervillains and then put bombs in their head and then blackmail them? Just they got to do whatever we say.
So, hmm. Okay, I don't want to sound like a supervillain right now, but I think it's
No,
just going to
no.
happen.
This is my favorite. I always love supervillain, Amelia.
So, if I'm Amanda Waller and I have this problem where, okay, we had this super, super, super powered dude, and we were lucky enough that somehow he's this like innocent Kansas like dude, uh, but he died. So I know that all this power is possible. I know that there are all these other people, and it's not always gonna go that well. And we're trying to make everything work here. It's not a bad plan if your ethics skew a certain direction to say, okay, well, let's take the problem, essentially coerce the problem to work for us. So they either work for us or they die, and we don't have to feel guilty about it because technically we didn't execute them because they had a choice.
That's true. And nobody, it's as horrible as it is to say, nobody misses them,
Right.
right? Nobody misses them. And if they fail the mission, they just blame it on supervillains.
Exactly. So really, it's
Fair.
kind of yeah,
Yeah.
it's skeezy.
Yeah. There are a couple birds you're getting to kill with one stone there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I mean I I could see that getting approved. If it was done in the right level of privacy in the right way at the right time.
Right.
Unfortunately, some dark decisions are made at certain levels of things, and I'm sure many governments have made not so ethically wonderful decisions. So I don't know. This one, I see where it's coming from, and I could see it getting passed, especially because Amanda Waller is good at what she does.
So speaking of ethical decisions,
Oh no.
you're the doctor here. The people that were coerced into being on the Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
You watch these movies. How many of them are in a mental state to be coerced, and how many of them should be seeking
Mm.
mental help? How many of them should be in a mental health facility? Like, do you think Nanawe King Shark agreed to be on the Suicide Squad? We find him and he's just holding a book upside down.
Okay, so that's a fair point. Although I would say not necessarily mental health related.
Okay.
However, that's an excellent point. So there are, okay, I don't, I can speak from medical decisions, not government wants you to put a bomb in your head and go do stuff. But let's say that these things are linked.
Right.
So there's decision making capacity. So are you able to effectively take in information, process the information, and communicate your desires in terms of your medical decisions? And sometimes people lack decisional capacity. Sometimes it's a permanent thing, sometimes it's a temporary thing. So, like if someone has a really significant mental health episode, for example, a person could lack capacity for a short period of time. Same could happen with something medical that happens. The most obvious would be if, say, someone's unconscious. Other examples might be someone has later stages of dementia, they're very delirious, they're not able to take in all the information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would agree that there is information to suggest he may not have been fully aware and been able to take in and communicate effectively for them to know for sure if he was consenting. Albeit, I'm not really sure consent is what they were looking for.
Right. He might not have been in the right mindset. Unlike Polka Dot Man, who is
Oh
a
man.
who is a the just the spitting image of mental health. Right.
So
He
Polka Dot Man, yes.
yes.
So
Uh
so Polka Dot Man. Let me think about him. I hadn't really thought about it at the time. So I love him. I
Oh
think.
yeah, he was great. I
Yeah,
love
he's
Polka Dot
wonderful.
Man. He was absolutely great. But I mean, even in Mission Control, they're
He,
he's like, "We're all gonna die," and he just goes, "I hope so." I'm like, "Wait,
yeah.
wait. I don't know if he needs to go. I don't." I don't
And so I think this obviously shows, oh yeah, she was meant to be a psychologist. I'm like naturally drawn toward that, like, oh, let me hug you. Um, yeah, so yes, he's like, oh, I hope so. And of course everyone's like, oh no. Um, and yeah, so okay, so essentially someone who I mean you only get bits and pieces of him, but this poor guy seems like he probably has like really intense PTSD or something. Um he essentially was him and all of his siblings were experimented on by his mother who is desperate for them all to become superheroes, and he has like some weird virus or something where he like essentially has to like spit out polka dots every
right.
twice a day, I think, or something. It's very
Yep.
strange. And he sees his mom everywhere, literally. And it's so hysterical in the show. But you're right. It's they hit on it in these comedic ways. But yeah, I would say honestly, I think you're right. He's the one that probably yeah should be in a psychiatric facility. I mean, I
Right.
don't know what he did and why he did it, but it seems like everything revolves around his mom
Right.
pretty constantly throughout the whole thing. What he focuses on, what brings him to act on things. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with Polka Dot Man. Oh, poor guy.
Now we have so all right, so we have touched on the villains that have been coerced. We've touched on the villains that shouldn't that can't really be coerced, but somehow they're on the team. You know, we got the Weasels and the Polka Dot Mans, right? The Harley
Yeah,
Quinns.
Weasel, we don't know if the Weasel consented either, or if he even knew
Well,
what was
right.
going on.
And they made that joke in the movie when Rick Flag's talking. He's like, I'm pretty sure he's agreed to do this, and he's just over
Mm-hmm.
there just like licking himself. But Rick Flag is actually who I was going to touch on next.
Ah,
He was the person that did not have to be coerced. He
true.
is just in it,
Well, he was
right?
coerced in the first one.
Okay, yeah. In the first one, it was almost like he didn't even have to be coerced. He's like, oh my gosh, I have to save her. I love her. Like it wasn't even.
But do you remember how he met her and who was behind it and believed that he would form the attachment and therefore put him with
Yes,
the Enchantress
I did.
alternate?
I did forget how convoluted that
Amanda
first movie
Waller.
was.
That woman is friggin' evil.
Right. That's what. Oh gosh, that's what makes it. She has to be a very busy person, right? Because on one side, it's like, okay, I need to move all of these chess pieces to get him to do
Mm-hmm.
what I want, and then Killer Croc wants BET,
Yep.
so we can get him BET, make him fall in love with this person, make sure the Joker abandons her at this moment, put this guy's daughter in front of him. Like it's a
She
busy.
she
It's
would
a
have
busy
made an
process.
excellent she would have made an excellent wedding planner.
Yeah, maybe the red wedding.
Oh,
she would
that
have.
still
She would have.
hurts. That still hurts.
It does. It
Sorry,
does.
Game of
And
Thrones reference.
yeah. Spoiler alert: the red wedding isn't a normal wedding. That's all I'll say. It,
What? Something in Game of Thrones doesn't go as expected? That's
right.
shocking.
Right. But yeah, it's yeah. Which yeah. Oh gosh, talk about a Suicide Squad there, right?
Oh, jeez.
But yeah. So Rick Flag, yeah. So he is very interesting because he leads this team, and what's funny is before he led the team in the comic books, his dad led the team. So there's Rick Flag
Oh.
and there's Rick Flag Jr., right?
Ah.
And he just kind of leads this team, and it's like, if you don't do what I say, I'll kill you. Like he's just this badass. It's just like, oh man, we need at least one of those, right? Normally in the Suicide Squad movies we get three, but we need at least one, and he's the guy, and he wears an orange shirt and sticks out like a sore thumb, and he's the leader. Uh, what does it take him to go on these missions? Because what's so
Mm.
funny is we see in almost all of them that it's unplanned. Like there's something
Mm-hmm.
that he doesn't even know. They brief him on the mission and just leave 2/3 of it out.
Yeah. There is this odd thing about him, and so okay. I mean, I have experience working with veterans and people who have been in the military, but I don't really have experience with like special forces and things like that. So, admittedly, I'm lacking in knowledge with some of this, but I would expect this to be very difficult for him. It's almost like it almost seems like you're taking the person trained for the military but also throwing in kind of like spy stuff where it's like go by the seat of your pants and every man for himself or every person for themselves. And it is kind of this weird concoction that, yeah, it has to be really hard for someone trained military where there's the hierarchy and you listen to the person that comes above you in the hierarchy and you train together, and there tends to be, let's just say, a lot more predictability than you would have with these teams. So I don't know if like special forces or anything like that would shift in any way. But yeah, I would imagine this being very difficult. It makes more sense to me if there's some sort of explanation behind it, especially because these people are getting thrown out there to die if that happens. Oh well. And so you wouldn't think he'd want to be involved in that, but it makes sense when there's some addition to that story. So if it's, for example, his father did it before him, there's a lot of legacy stuff, like a
Right.
lot of military families, for example. So I could see there being kind of a legacy thing there. Or in the movies, where for the first one, he himself is coerced essentially. So Amanda Waller gets him to fall for someone that she has captive
Yeah.
and is like, all right, well, if you want her to do okay, if you want to help her, you help me. But the second movie, they don't really. I don't know. They didn't really tie the two together in terms of
No,
that.
they didn't,
But
because the two movies were definitely kind of a soft reboot, because the Rick Flag we got in the second movie is not in any way the same Rick Flag we got in the first movie.
mm-mm.
He's closer to being a member, like fitting in with the Suicide Squad.
Which I suppose that makes sense though,
Oh yeah,
given everything he went through with the Enchantress, and I forget the name of the woman he was with who would
June
become
Moon.
June Moon.
June Moon.
So,
Yes.
I guess all of that could make sense, and yeah, who knows what happened in between. But you're right. He's definitely acclimated more to it in the second one. But it's interesting because yeah, it's like, okay, so you need someone you can trust to kind of oversee everything, and yet they had two squads in the second movie, and they only
Oh,
had one Rick Flag. And so it almost feels like he is also pretty dispensable, which I think he figured out by the end.
yeah, and well, it was funny because so as soon as they announced this movie, the second one, I saw how many people were in it, and my first thought was, "Ooh, they're gonna kill a lot of them off." And even in the trailer, you would see one team, but then all the dialogue and stuff would be with another team, and so instantly I guessed that they were gonna pull a Death Proof, like in the movie Death Proof. They introduce the entire cast of characters, and for the first 30 minutes you're following them, and then every single one of them just dies a
Oh,
horrible
jeez.
death, and then it's like, oh yeah, press reset. And I love when they do looky loos like that. They did it also in the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Like they
Mm.
introduced the girl, it's like, oh, she's gonna be our main character, and then boom, she dies a horrible painful death, and then they start the movie. And that's what happened here. This like,
See,
oh
I
look.
hate stuff like that. Don't tear my heart to shreds.
So I do it. I just had a feeling, because when they introduced like Nathan Fillion's character that could like detach his arms and slap
Oh yeah, that's
people and
so freaking weird.
right, they introduced all these random characters. I was like, oh man, there's no way. Like there's no way they're gonna live. And oh my gosh, I don't think it's been a long time since I laughed as hard as when Weasel just seemingly drowns upon hitting hitting the water.
So I have something else that I wanted to talk about today that I don't know if it lines up, but it might be a piece of it for Rick Flag.
Okay.
So, I was talking about cognitive dissonance and how sometimes we do things that conflict with what we might want or value or believe in. And so that discomfort. And so you see a lot of that in the first movie. And then he seems to be embracing things pretty readily in the second one. So I also wonder if there could be some effort justification for him.
Okay.
So an example of this would be so I'll talk about another experiment they did. So they had these women, and they had to read some sort of snippet in order to join a group. And I forget what one of them was. It was something that wasn't embarrassing. But the other group, they had to read out loud to people. It was like some like sexually explicit paragraph. So it
Uh,
like was embarrassing to
mhm.
read out loud. And so what they found was that the people who had to do something embarrassing to get into the group actually ended up saying that they enjoyed the group, they appreciated and valued the group more. So essentially, they went through more to connect with that group, and therefore they valued the group more.
Huh.
So I wonder if some of that could also be playing into it, because I mean, gosh knows he put in so much effort. He's doing all of this for stuff that it's unclear if he really believes in, aside from the woman he loves, of course. But if you're putting in more and more and more effort, and it's not something that you feel great about, to some extent, if you're putting that effort, you're trying to explain away that effort. And so some of it could be that the more he was committed, it's kind of like, like a bad relationship where it's not going great, but you've put in so much time and energy and
Oh.
effort anyway, and you don't know if it's going to get any better. So you keep going.
Oh, yeah. And you kind of it's almost like Well, what's strange about that is I feel like whenever that happens, even if it's not your fault, you shift the blame to it being your fault,
That can happen.
right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it'll depend. Once again, think about the $1 versus the $20, where if there's enough going on outside of you, or it's something that is just particularly hard for you to potentially accept about yourself, you might be very focused on things external to yourself as being the reason. So, well, I did that because of the bomb in my head or because of the da 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 or whatever it might be. But yeah, another thing that can happen is absolutely you look within yourself and you adjust internally or you explain things based on you and kind of adjusting your viewpoint of yourself and the role you played in it.
You brought up cognitive dissonance, and I am of course not the psych expert of this show. I just read things. Would the cognitive dissonance definition fit with the character Peacemaker and his motives for doing things? Because he when he's talking, he sounds so ridiculous. Like I want peace, and I'm willing to kill as many men, women, and children as necessary to get it. And that sounds so ridiculous. And so I was going to ask, is
Hmm.
cognitive dissonance the word, or is there a whole nother category for his character? Because he's like, he was Amanda Waller's secret weapon all along
Yeah.
in this second
Hmm.
movie.
That's a good question. So, one of the things that has me thinking that no, it's not, is it seems like his ethics line up really more along the lines of Amanda Waller, where for him,
Oh, yeah.
he has a certain definition of peace, and it takes a lack of peace to in order to obtain the larger peace. However, it is a confusing logical structure that means you might be right that it actually might be some cognitive dissonance. And so sometimes too we have confirmation bias and we ignore information available to us because it doesn't line up with what we believe and what we perceive to be happening. And so sometimes we do a lot of like weird logic somersaults that don't entirely make sense. And this happens for everybody, not just people who like have anxiety or psychosis or anything like that. Just the human brain, we will look for things that confirm our bias, confirm what we believe, and disconfirm other things that we don't believe it is. So, and that is often kind of tied to cognitive dissonance and those same terms. So,
Hmm.
you might be right because yeah, he does seem to do some weird logic flips where he doesn't fully explain it. He just kind of it's like water off the duck's back where it's like I'm willing to kill every living thing if it means peace. So
Yeah.
you might be right. And actually that might be why the show Peacemaker is so interesting
Oh
because
gosh, I
it
loved it.
it was so good. It was so good. Oh man.
Loved it. Because speaking of like when you and honestly, that's one of the things that makes the Suicide Squad so interesting is because when you look at every character by themselves, which in these movies a lot of times you do get a little snippet of each character by themselves,
Yeah.
they all have very different motives but want the same thing. It's certainly your definition of a ragtag team, and you see ragtag team movies all the time. You know, Magnificent Seven, Guardians of the Galaxy. Like you just there, it's certainly a common theme for ragtag teams. But with this, they are coerced or forced into it
Mhm.
instead of, oh, you want what I want, let's do this, right? Let's form a temporary alliance. It's like, no, we have a bomb in our head. We're definitely aligned. And not only that, but by the end, every time, even though at the beginning they describe him as the worst of the worst and show or you hear about the terrible things that they've done, and at the end, no matter what it is they've done, it seems like it pales in comparison to
Mm.
what Amanda Waller is willing to do.
Well, and that's something I actually really do appreciate about this stuff is that I mean, I've not met every person in the world by any means, and there's a continuum of pretty much everything in life. And so where we might put people on the spectrum of like good or not so good.
Right.
But I've yet to meet a person who you couldn't find one single good or redeemable thing about them. Now, does it outweigh all the other stuff? I can't answer that. And I'm not saying that that's always the case per se,
Right.
but we do have this tendency to want to put evil in a box because we feel safer that way. The people that do bad things, they go in this box over here. And I do like that Suicide Squad really complicates that picture where these
Yes.
characters, no, you don't. Well, okay. I'm sure some people are like, I would want to be friends with these people. But most of us probably like, okay, it would not be the best idea to be friends with these people. And at the same time, there are qualities that we're drawn toward and that we enjoy about them and that we see as a positive that, yeah, you might not have seen at the get-go. And on the flip side, you see multiple people. You were mentioning Peacemaker. I would loop him in here too, where you also see people who at least are claiming and seemingly are trying to do things for quote unquote good or the better of things, and yet end up doing very nefarious stuff that, like you said, makes them comparable to what we might put in the evil box or the
Oh my
villain
gosh.
box.
Oh my gosh, and that's so true, and it's funny because it's what these movies do is it puts you behind the protagonist,
Mm,
whoever it may be. And if you were the protagonist in this movie, you could put this camera behind anybody and it's like, "Oh, I understand why that person's doing that." And what's funny is even in the second movie, you could put that protagonist camera behind the ultimate villain in that, Starro. He was just
yeah,
chilling out in space,
that was
minding his
sad.
own business, and then they
Yeah.
came and grabbed him and he fought back, right? And
Mm-hmm.
essentially that's what made him the bad guy.
Yeah. And these things often aren't simple, and I think that that's why it's scary to look at, because if someone is just bad because they're bad, that in some ways is easier to accept than we each might end up being the villain depending on the circumstances.
Wow, yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point.
We got deep today.
We did with the Suicide Squad, which
Yes.
I laugh every time at it. It's like I was so excited going into it. It's like today I'm gonna talk about Weasel, and it's gonna be great, right? But
Oh man.
so do uh do we have a mindful nerd moment for today?
We do. All right. So here's what I was thinking, because I was like, oh, geez, I don't know what to do here. Um, so I was just thinking about what it would be like to be in the Suicide Squad. And coercion usually, makes people angry, being coerced into things you don't want to do. Um, and so I thought maybe we could do a little bit of a mindful nerd moment for anger.
Ooh,
Yes.
ooh,
So essentially, putting ourselves into the mindset of someone on the Suicide Squad where, okay, Amanda Waller, she's done her whole spiel. She's zapped you with your little bomb. You've got the bomb in your neck. You're seething, understandably so. So it's not that it's not that it's abnormal or that you shouldn't feel angry. It's that, I mean, it makes sense that you're feeling angry. And okay, so you leave Amanda Waller. You're on the aircraft going wherever you're going to be dropped off somewhere, and you're still seething. But guess what? Amanda Waller's not there. So you're just seething in all of the anger, and it's just kind of sitting with you. and it might just keep building and building and building. It might cause you to maybe do things that make things even worse for you, like reacting to things without thinking it through, so that this already difficult situation goes worse for you. So how to just try and manage that anger while you're sitting there waiting for the mission to start without it just kind of cycling, getting bigger and bigger and just getting in your way when Amanda Waller's not even there for you to yell at her. So she's not even going to know. So that's what I was thinking, just to put you in the mindset.
All right.
All right.
Do it.
So as per usual, get comfortable, figure out how you want to sit. And you want to sit in a comfortable yet alert position. So, you don't want to be slouched over or anything. Have your hands resting comfortably. Usually the best place is at your sides or just in your lap. And if you're comfortable, gently closing your eyes, or you can just relax them and not focus on anything in particular. And first, just check in with your body. Notice where it's making contact with your seat. Just notice where you feel pressure in the body, not paying any particular attention to anything, just kind of noticing what it's like to sit. And let's take some deep breaths, completely filling up your lungs all the way, holding it for a second, and then completely letting that breath out, releasing all the air out of your lungs. And then do that 1 or 2 more times to just help us center into the mindful nerd moment. And now I want you to think to that time I was describing. You're on the aircraft, you're part of the suicide squad, and you're experiencing that anger that you feel with what Amanda Waller has done, what she's told you, what she's done, and where you're going. And just envision taking the experience of what happened, allowing yourself to feel the anger. Allow it to get strong while keeping it in a safe zone. So not getting to a point where you feel the urge to get up and scream or jump around, but rather just allowing the feeling of anger that comes with this situation. And notice what arises. You might notice other emotions like sadness or fear. For now, see if you can stay with the anger. And notice where in your body you experience the anger. Explore the feeling. You may be tempted to try and push it away. Instead, investigate it. Notice how it feels. Notice any large or subtle sensations in your body. And when you notice a feeling that comes with anger, look into it and see whether it seems to get larger or smaller in intensity. Does it change or move? What temperatures or pressure or other sensations you might feel in your body when you notice the anger. And now let's practice bringing compassion to the anger. The feeling of anger is normal. It's a part of being human. We all experience anger at times. See if you can cradle your own anger as if you were a mother cradling a newborn. Notice what happens if you hold it with tenderness and care. And when you're ready, say goodbye to the feeling. Allow it to leave you. Thank it for the experience that you had, and allow it to leave you. And as you do, slowly bring your attention back to your breath and allow your emotions to settle into the space of your breathing. Breathing in, filling your lungs all the way, holding it for a moment, and exhaling out. And allow yourself one more breath. A deep breath in, filling the lungs, holding it for a moment, and then releasing that breath. And with it, allowing your emotions to continue to settle. And when you're ready, start moving a bit. Get your body used to being back here. You're not on the aircraft anymore. You've gotten rid of Amanda Waller and that pesky bomb in your head. And you can open your eyes, refocus, and we can wrap up this podcast episode.
Okay.
How was that one?
It was good. It was good. The thing that's so I feel like it's difficult to be mindful when you're angry about something. I mean, the same thing goes for when you're in a state of fear or anxiety, but there's something that's just different about anger. It's just it's hard to calm down. It really is. It's hard to calm down when you're just at rage, and it feels farther away from serenity than the others. I think that's how it feels. I think but at the same time, I realize though that's different for everyone.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, there are things that differ for everyone. And you're also making a great point. I mean, think about it. Anger is meant to be activating.
Right.
So think about one of the things that I said during the mindfulness exercise, because sometimes because it can be so activating because of how anger can be, and for some people, they might struggle when anger gets really heightened to not end up aggressing or doing something that might be harmful to themselves or someone else. So a lot of times people might try and push it down. But the problem is then we can't process through that emotion and allow ourselves to move forward. And anger tells us something, just like sadness does, just like excitement and all of them. But you're right, the activation part of it can make it really hard to be mindful at the same time.
So when you say that anger is activating, are you talking about as far as the actions coming afterwards? Like, for example, fear can make someone either super still or run away versus anger pushing someone towards something?
Yeah. So fear can push someone toward. Different people have different responses. There's
Right.
fight, flight, or
Fight or
freeze.
flight. Right. Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Which you were just talking about. When it comes to anger, though, and once again, it varies based on the person. Some people internalize their anger. But in general, anger pushes us to act and to change something about the situation we're in.
Sure.
So oftentimes it's something that really pushes us to change something. Now, for some people, they might externalize it or try and change what's going on around them. Other people might be more prone to internalizing or trying to change something within themselves. And probably the best balance is something that does both.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, a hard one to do. And once again, this is something where sometimes it's helpful to imagine yourself in someone else's shoes to kind of test something out, because it's a lot easier to say, okay, how do I observe this anger if we're looking at like a scenario like we did today versus you're in the moment angry at something someone just did to you. You're still feeling everything intensely. That's going to be the hardest time to use the mindfulness. It's better to practice with, okay, let me think about something that's happened before that I have a little distance from.
You know, it's so funny because we're still in this comic book universe, and I'm like, man, so instead of anger, I should have peace. And immediately I thought about Peacemaker, and I'm like, no. Nope, we're back on the wrong side again. That's not where we're supposed to be.
Well, and that's the thing is, I'm not a fan of shoulds. Most therapists are
Okay.
not a fan of shoulds because shoulds tend to bring about shame and guilt. And I mean, what is a should? What do we really
Yeah.
mean by I should be one way versus another? You are.
I guess it is kind of an absolute saying the word should, isn't it?
And it's as if saying my reality is wrong. It's like, well, my reality is my reality right now, whether it's the best for me or not. And sometimes anger is necessary. It's helpful. And while I think it gets very symbolic with what you were talking about with Peacemaker, exactly. I don't know anyone who's at peace all of the time. And once again, anger, it tells us something. Now, do we need to find ways to be able to listen to it effectively and respond to it effectively? Absolutely. I'm not saying that anger can't, end up getting away from us and can't get us into trouble. But it's our response to the anger that tends to do that rather than the anger itself.
Gotcha.
So yeah, anger is not a problem. But people can struggle with being able to manage it, especially if someone just has a lot of that anger happening for them.
Okay, so I'm walking away with, it's not being angry that's the problem, it's what you do with it.
Nice.
Thanks for nerding out with us.
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. You can find me at Crafting the Mind on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
And I'm comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. You can find me and my friends' movie reviews and reaction videos at teamjvs.com or on YouTube at teamjvs. For more information on this and other topics, check out our website at bat-therapy.com. To keep current on episodes and other updates, subscribe to our Bat Therapy YouTube channel or follow us on social media. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.